بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين الحبيب المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته الكرام المنتجبين. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, may all the peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad and upon his purified progeny and the believers of his companions. And may the peace and blessings be upon all of you, dear brothers and sisters. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'll continue with our Qur'an study for today. We start with verse 66. I'll read the Arabic and then you will hear the English, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وهو الذي أحياكم ثم يميتكم ثم يحييكم إن الإنسان لكفور.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It is He who gave you life, will cause you to die, and will give you life again. Surely the man is most ungrateful.
Well, this is the cycle of our journey. God gives us life. God has created a way, a system in this life that people are born, humans are born. He gives them life, and then he causes them to die after a while, and then will resurrect them again on the day of judgment. And many people, a lot of people, I think, or almost all people, they fear death, and they should be. This is very natural. We have to do our best to protect ourselves and stay alive as much as we can. That's how God wanted us to be. But in reality, death is a natural process of our journey in this world. We get to be born here, and then one day we have to leave. There is an age, a lifespan for everything, including humans. And you would not like to imagine what would happen if there was no death. I guess life would be miserable if there was no death. Would be much miserable than right now. So death is a very natural process for our journey in this life. We get to be born, we live our life and consume our age, and then it comes a time that we depart this. And in fact, death could be considered a mercy for a lot of people. There are a lot of stories that I can share with you and show how death is really, at sometimes, is mercy. When people loses their faculties, lose their health, lose their ability to take care of themselves, lose their power of reasoning. So this is the time for everybody to depart this world. In the tradition of Islam, and I guess in other traditions, death is not the end of everything. Death is the end of our life in this life and the beginning of our journey to the hereafter. So death is not that ugly and bad, though we need to fear death and protect ourselves of, and live as much as we can. God, Almighty God, describes death in the Quran by the word liqa'ullah, meeting God. That's a very beautiful term for death. The word death could be very ugly and a source of fear. But in fact, liqa'ullah, to go and meet God, who is the source of love, care, generosity, kindness, forgiveness, beauty, wisdom, that's a beautiful moment. So God says in this verse, it is He who gives you, He gives you life, and He causes you to die, and will resurrect you again. This is the summary of what Islam believes in and promotes, that God gives life and takes it away, and then He will resurrect us again. إن الإنسان لكفور. Remember all the favoritism and the blessings of God that He mentioned in the previous verses: the rain, the day, the night, all the beautiful things that He mentioned in this chapter, or all other beautiful blessings that He has given us. With all of that, including death, with all of that, a lot of people are ungrateful. They abuse these blessings. They forget that these are from God. And in general, they could be ungrateful to God. All right. Verse number 67. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. لكل أمة جعلنا منسكا هم ناسكوه فلا ينازعنك في الأمر وادع إلى ربك إنك لعلى هدى مستقيم.
For every nation we prescribed rites which they follow. Therefore, let them not draw you into a dispute concerning this matter. Keep inviting all to your Lord, and surely you are the rightly guided.
Every nation, every followers of a tradition, they have their own rituals. These rituals at certain areas could be same or it could be different. Just look at, observe the prayers, for example, how every community of faith practice their own prayers. Here, the Quran, first of all, acknowledges the fact that every community of faith, they have their own rituals. We need to accept this fact that they have the right to practice their rituals, though their rituals and their rites and their sacred practices could be different from ours. For example, during church services, there could be wine served, little wine served. That's part of their sacred practices. While in our faith, consuming wine is not permissible. So every community of faith, they have their sacred rites. We have to acknowledge this fact. Every member of any faith should acknowledge this fact for others as well. So in this chapter, the chapter is about Hajj, right? About pilgrimage. Muslims, remember that we said before, Muslims and pagans used to perform Hajj at the same time, at the same place, together for a certain period of time. In fact, until the year 9th after migration. So at the Hajj time, at the Hajj season, within the Grand Mosque, there are Muslims and there are pagans who would perform Hajj. However, the rituals that Muslims were doing were a little bit different than the pagans. And the pagans were used to their own tradition. So they were not happy to see Muslims bringing a new tradition to Hajj. They were not happy at all. For example, some of them would circumambulate around the Kaaba naked for certain reasons. Some, not all, some. When Islam came, Islam said men should take off their clothes, their regular clothes, and then put on 2 simple pieces of garments, one on top and one on the waist. So that's another, this is one of the differences called ihram. We've talked about this before. And many other examples. There is a list of differences. Pagans were not happy with that. They started arguing and in fact disputing with Muslims that why you are doing this. But the Quran is warning Muslims and is warning the Prophet ﷺ, advising him not to be pulled in this useless dispute with the pagans. The Quran acknowledges the fact that every nation, every community, they have their own sacred practices. They have to acknowledge this fact for Muslims as well. There is no need to dispute. The Quran says, you are on the right path. Continue to call for the path of God, but don't fall into this meaningless dispute or arguments with the pagans about your rituals. You continue doing your job. They continue to do their job, and that's it. There is no need for a dispute on this. So this verse actually acknowledges the fact of differences and warn, and this is a very sensitive issue, brothers and sisters, that people, in fact, sometimes they spend hours and hours disputing a matter. And at the end, no one would agree with the opinion of the other side. A lot of people have sometimes, a passion to do this. So the Quran is warning us not to do that. And then the next verse continues in the same line. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإن جادلوك فقل الله أعلم بما تعملون.
And if they argue with you, say, God knows best what you are doing.
If they continue with their dispute and jadal, arguments, the useless arguments, if they continue with that, then tell them, well, God is the best to know. He is best aware about what you are doing. What an awesome, what a wise response to deal with differences in faith or in about any matter. That you say, you know what, God knows better. He will judge. I'm not going to judge you. Please don't judge me. God knows better about these things. The Quran not only warn us not to continue disputing and arguing. The Quran actually teaches us a lot of manners, suggests a very civilized way how to deal with differences, whether it is religious differences or even differences in business and family and any kind of business and politics. You may say, you know what, in a very civilized manner, and instead of saying you are wrong, I am right, saying, you know what, God knows better. It's really the best and the most civilized and most peaceful way to end disputes. This does not mean that you end raising awareness and educating. We continue to educate. Others continue to educate and teach. That's their rights. That's a given right for every community to raise awareness and to teach, but not to fall in a burden and use this dispute and arguments. A lot of people have this passion to spend hours and hours disputing. and arguing about religion or about politics or family or business or you name it, whatever. They can spend hours and at the end, nobody is convinced. Everyone would keep his or her opinion to himself or herself. Quran says this is a waste of time, especially when it comes to the sacred rites, not to the principles. You know, the way we pray, the way you pray, the way we fast, the way you fast. You know, my way is right, your way is wrong. Quran is warning us from falling in this trap and wasting our time and energy in engaging in this dispute because it is useless. It does not have any benefits. Yes, again, we can continue to teach, raising awareness and educate, but we should stay out of useless arguments and dispute. And the best way the Quran is recommending is say, God knows better. What a really beautiful, civilized, and peaceful way to deal with our differences. And then verse number 69, in the same line again. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الله يحكم بينكم يوم القيامة فيما كنتم فيه تختلفون.
God will judge between you on the day of judgment concerning matters in which you differ.
Exactly. What a beautiful way. If still they continue, you say, you know what, at the end, on the day of judgment, God will judge between us. God will judge between you or between us. So let us leave this useless dispute to the day of judgment. At that day, God will, he knows better and he will judge. I really wish that at least those who believe in the Quran, those who believe in the revelation of the Quran, to practice this and say, you know what, though we might differ in our school of thought, in our practices, the way we fast, the way we, we agree on the principles. We agree on the beliefs, we agree on the principles, but there might be minor differences in the way we practice our faith. I wish Muslims, those who believe, at least those who believe in the Quran, would practice this verse and say, you know what, let us differ all these differences to the day of judgment, for God knows better, and he will judge based on, based on what is right and what is wrong. And this also applies to other faiths. So we are not meant to argue, but to respect one another and to leave the differences to the day of judgment. Now we will make our Quran study session a little bit shorter today because we have another session in a few minutes. However, when you study the Quran, and especially, for example, this chapter, the chapter of Hajj, pilgrimage. Hajj is one of our practices. And we have studied so far the rituals within Islam and how it might differ, for example, with the pagans. Pagans used to do their rituals for hundreds or maybe thousands of years. Islam, in fact, endorsed Hajj, continued to practice Hajj, and said Hajj is one of our Muslim practices. But there are differences in the way Muslims practice their Hajj. Now you have a sense of what the nature of the issues the Prophet used to face. at that time. And this is in Medina. We're not talking in Mecca when Muslims used to be persecuted. Still in Medina, there were a lot of hot issues that Muslims were concerned, and these issues could be sometimes they could create conflicts with pagans or people of other faith traditions. But listen and see how God has taught the Prophet and Muslims to respond to these issues that might create a conflict. The way God taught Muslims is to stay away from conflicts, from unnecessary conflicts. Why there should be a conflict on the way you do your tawaf or we do our tawaf. Everyone does their tawaf and they are free to practice their faith. Why should a conflict rise from that? So this is the way the Quran, in fact, is teaching, has taught the Prophet and teaching us to be civilized, to acknowledge the differences, and to be very polite in the way we deal with our differences, and not to use a disrespectful fashion or approach. Oh, you are wrong. You are absolutely wrong. What you are doing does not make sense. My way of practicing the faith is the right way. That's not what the Quran is recommending. And this is what we need to practice here. I'd like to end our session here. If you have any question or comment, please ask now or say your comments, and then we will take a break for 1 minute, and then we start our next session, inshallah.